Common Knowledge is brought to you by PureMTGO.com and InkedGaming.com. Use coupon code CCMTG10 at checkout for a 10% discount on all Inked Gaming supplies and accessories. You can support the show directly through Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge.
This is the Common Knowledge Podcast. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lobbert.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to episode 73 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I am your host, Brandon, and joined with me on the line is the elusive Spellfist himself, Sean the Lobbert.
How's it going, Brandon?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good.
I called you the elusive Spellfist because it was the first card I looked at on my shelf just now. But also, I think it's fitting because you're elusive.
I don't think so. I'm
You are
a pretty big person. I don't think if you were looking for me, I don't think I could hide.
It's true. I could probably find you in a crowd, but could I get you to come to Tuesday Night Pauper with me? Probably not. You're elusive.
Okay, I get it.
Oh man, so we've got kind of a bit of a level up episode today. We're going to be talking about ramp spells in Pauper. Some of the powerful ramp spells that our format has access to, how you can utilize them in constructing your decks and your mana bases, and what sort of payoffs you can expect. Before we get into all that, though, of course, card of the week.
Card of the week.
Our card of the week this week is Kasali Pride Mage. It is a green and a white for a 2/2 cat wizard. It has Exalted, and you can pay 1, sacrifice it, and destroy target artifact or enchantment.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff with this, or there's a lot of text on this card, first of all. So it's got Exalted, and then it just has that ability to destroy artifact enchantment removal. And so this is sort of a card that's really powerful, I think, in a lot of obvious ways. And it does see a lot of play outside of our format, in modern decks, Legacy, etc. But it's not really a card that shows up in Pauper very often.
Right. I think the reason it doesn't show up in Pauper very often is up until this point, casting a hybrid, if you're casting a hybrid spell, you couldn't really be an aggressive deck. That could be changed, I think, with Arkham's Astrolabe. Like, our whole episode last week was on it, and every time I'm going into leagues now, yeah, it's in most decks I play against. And I think that possibly a 2-color deck could be better and more aggressive in those colors, especially since white is one of those colors, and you can do the whole artifact bounce thing. That's not that aggressive of a strategy, I'll admit, but is it weird to say a slower aggressive deck? Because I can't really say mid-range because it's not like blowing up their creatures and stuff. Like, I was thinking of making a deck that was these colors, and you could play all of the things like invasive species, so that you have that many more bounce spells, and you could just keep pumping out larger than average creatures, like kind of like a zoo deck, but with more card advantage. Anyway,
yeah.
Up till this point, I even out of sideboards, I don't see this card, and I think that it's just because I think the best thing it could blow up is maybe like a Mirror Enforcer or a land, and you don't want to trade your 2/2 for that, and so there's just other cards you'd rather put in your deck.
Yeah, I think so too. I think one of the other big draws to this card in not older formats, our format's pretty old as far as the playable cards go. The more non-restrictive Eternal formats, they have access to a lot of really powerful tutors, and so they can get a silver bullet like this into their deck and then get it pretty reliably when they need it. And then even if it's in their main deck, if they draw it and they don't, like, its ability's not relevant, it's still a 2/2 with Exalted. That Exalted sort of has like pseudo haste, because that's going to come down. If you have another creature in play, it's going to attack and it's going to immediately get that buff. Or this card itself just isn't dead because it's a decent creature in combat.
Yeah, and that plus one, it's not always just like, okay, I did one extra damage, that's all I have to factor into this. Sometimes it's like you now have a core sky fisher that's a 3/4, and you can attack through opposing core sky fishers and threaten to trade.
Eat people's insectile aberrations.
Yeah. It is really, really good, and when I've played it, I've been really satisfied with it. I think that there's just the shell that it went into wasn't good enough at that point, and that was really the big issue.
Yeah.
But it is a weird interaction, but it does allow you to attack through Guardian of the Guild Pact, since this is a hybrid card, and that's not like a huge factor in playing this or not, but it's just like this card has weird bits of like icing that are really good. If they try to remove it, you can blow up like something that's not very good. There are a lot of artifacts running around. Blow up an Astrolabe or something, and like against a Tron deck, that's significant.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that was our card of the week, Sully Pride Mage. Card that's a little less popular in our format, although powerful, which is sort of why we wanted to highlight it. Also, I never realized that in the artwork, it's kind of like standing on the Great Wall of China.
Yeah, I didn't really notice that
I guess
ever.
it's like the Great Wall of Bant. What does Bant have a wall for?
Jund.
Well, I mean, they didn't know what Jund was until the Conflux.
They hurried and built a wall.
The Conflux started happening and they built a wall in like an hour. Keep those
I don't know.
out. But then how do they stop all the Jund dragons?
I'm sure that there's other creature types on what's it called? Bant Shard. And it's just they're keeping the other kind of creature types out.
The cat wizards don't want to mingle with the noble hierarchs.
Yeah.
The Knight of the Reliquaries of the Shard.
Humans?
Oh. Maybe. Anyway, all right. That was card of the week. Let's jump into the main topic.
Main topic.
I chose the main topic this week. It is ramp. I was thinking about some new cards and just like thinking about card evaluation, specifically in some of these ramp spells that a lot have been coming out recently, and I felt like it would be a good topic to discuss. Like, there are good ramp spells in our format, and I usually think that ramp spells are bad, and so we're going to dissect which ones are good and which ones are bad, and kind of how to think about that.
I feel like despite the fact that we have access to some of the most powerful ramp spells, it's just not a very good strategy in our format. And so,
well, when
I think there's like one deck. Like, there's the obvious ramp deck.
There are more than you would think of. When I was writing these notes, I was like, oh, and here, like...
Well, there's lots of decks that play these spells, but these aren't like ramp decks. Like, Elves plays a lot of mana dorks, but I would never call that a ramp deck.
Then Boggles
plays Utopia Sprawl, but like, I wouldn't call that a ramp deck either. You know? I don't think there's like a dedicated ramp deck in our format besides Tron.
Right, and our first bullet is the numbers. If you are a dedicated ramp deck, the reason pretty much these decks aren't working is you have to devote too many slots to ramp spells, and that isn't significant enough of a boost to make it so you win the game. You're just lowering your threat density in dedicated ramp decks. I did want to include ramp in other decks that aren't just dedicated ramp decks, to like show people how to use it, because that's the best way that you can use ramp spells.
Right, and that's sort of my point, is that like there's not really like a ramp deck, and I guess that was like my question was like, why not? Like, there are decks that take advantage of these cards, but they take advantage of them for different reasons, not just to like, I need to get to 7 lands as quickly as possible and cast Scape Shift.
Yeah,
like there's nothing like that going on. It's not about the number of lands. It's like, Boggles uses ramp spells because they're enchantments and they fix mana. And so that's sort of their thing. Tron is the only one I can think of, and they're not really ramping in the traditional sense of like trying to make extra land drops. They're just cheating and playing 1 + 1 + 1 = 7.
Okay, well, so Tron is 1, and then Elves. That's Yeah, that's a ramp deck. You're trying to make as much mana as quickly as possible. And then I count familiars.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Like
Yeah,
it's a
familiar.
combo version, but you're definitely doing things to
It's definitely a
generate.
ramp deck. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. It's I count it as a ramp deck in the same vein that I would count Amulet Titan in Modern as a ramp deck. They're going to win through the combo of like putting a bunch of lands into play.
yeah. So all of these decks have huge payoffs for the ramp, and you don't want to put the cart before the horse and say like I want to build a ramp deck. You really need to be like I want to do this. Like you can't make the means the goal.
Right. You can't just I want to be a ramp deck and then just have a bunch of ramp and nothing really meaningful to do with it.
Right.
It's like, I think there's a reason that there's not just like a dedicated play Ulamog's Crusher hard cast on turn 5 deck. Like my goal is to get 8 mana sources into play and cast Ulamog's Crusher as soon as possible.
Not that there's not people trying. People try that all the time and they just don't get very far off the ground.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of go through and today talk about why that is and also the decks that are utilizing ramp spells to their best in this format.
Right, so the first like classification of decks that use ramp is just basic old land ramp. You're using your lands to generate more mana, and that gives you an advantage because you can cast more powerful spells. Tron is the best one, and it's to the point where it's like, why would you even try to just put that many lands out onto the field? Because as soon as you get Tron, you don't even have that many in your deck, probably, that many lands, you know? And they don't have to dedicate very many spots to do it. Like, the whole part where if you're just casting, I don't know, like Harrow or Rampant Growth type effects, like, there are better versions of them.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of what's so powerful about Tron is they don't really have slots dedicated to ramping. The closest you could say they have is Expedition Map, and I would argue that that's a tutor. That doesn't they're not ramping with that. They're just tutoring the piece they need. Their ramp is built into their mana base, so it's basically just free. Like they're not giving up deck slots to, I need to cast this Harrow so I can get an extra land. I just need to get my 3 lands and then I've ramped.
Yeah, I would count it as a ramp spell just because of its function of like getting you more mana. But like the number of expedition maps even in the build is like at max it's 4. And
right.
If you're putting 4 slots in there, that's worth it and for the payoff. Whereas if you put 4 slots for a rampant growth type effect, or even one that's better, even for like Krosan Tusker, unless you're doing something broken with the Krosan Tusker, like you're not that far ahead, and the thinning is just not ever worth it.
Yeah,
I've played I've tried to do this, and I would get down to 0 cards in my deck that were lands, and it still was not like, oh, I'm drawing gas. It was cool that I was drawing gas every turn, but a lot of those spells were just more ramp spells.
Yeah.
So the kind of the next category I would say is creature ramp, and the obvious one is elves. That deck it's just a horde strategy, and it also is using those ramp spells to, one, cut down the number of lands that it even has to play, and any kind of like Timberwatch effect or like things that care about the number of elves, it's adding to that in kind of the same way that the enchantment strategy for Boggles adds to the number of enchantments so that they just make their creatures huge.
Yeah, and see, it's interesting because I've never thought of elves as a ramp deck. Like, I mean, it does generate more mana than any other deck in this format by a huge margin, but I've never considered it like as in the traditional sense of what I think of when it's ramp. But I think that you're right. Instead of ramping into a single huge threat, it ramps into just more stuff. Like it generates all this mana, and then you cast, your lead the Stampede, and you cast 5 more spells, and then those 5 more spells snowball into something else, and they're just like, making all this mana. And so, it's not the traditional sense of what you think of when you think it's a ramp deck, but I think it certainly is. It just does it, in a very different manner.
Yeah. Like, it does it in a traditional way, but then I also have Stompy in here, because it has, up to 8 copies of ramp spells in its deck. It's got the Nest Invaders, and it's got Curion Ranger. And I think Curion Rangers are typically more of like a 2 or a 3 of, but giving them the ability to have a 2-land hand or a 1-land hand, keep playing, and possibly get up to one of their 3-mana spells, or in the meantime, just 2 mana towards something every turn, just makes your deck a lot more consistent. And I think that's the sweet spot of like, those creatures are doing other stuff. They're protecting them from edicts, and they're protecting them from Curion Ranger protects from land destruction, but it also enables their Nettle Sentinel, and if they are running the Scattershot Archer out of the board, it's untapping that to kill Delvers. Like, it just has this this little ramp package that's, I just think, fantastic, and I wanted to like spotlight that as like, that's what I shoot towards when I'm designing a ramp package for something.
This is just a really good example of how you can utilize ramp spells to enable aggression. Cards like Curion Ranger and Nest Invader allow this deck to, get to its bigger spells without drawing too many lands, but it also just allows them to very often double spell in positions where they wouldn't be able to. This Stompy, like the way Stompy utilizes ramp, reminds me a lot of the old red-green aggro deck from Standard that used, just the Mana Dork Elf. I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the random tap, make a green mana. But like its function was just to like help you get out more
slightly larger things,
and then cast Domri Raid on turn 2. So it wasn't like, again, not in the traditional sense. When a lot of people think of ramp, you're thinking, oh, they're going to put turn 5, they're going to have 8 lands in play and they're going to do something huge. Like, no, they're just using these ramp creatures to make their deck more efficient and just a little bit quicker to get off the ground. And it's enabling aggression.
Yeah, like typical ramp strategies like that end up like, you can't just cast one spell and then have a hard time rebuilding. You really have to go for like because you're gonna get counterspelled, and that's just something that happens all the time in our format, and you have to be aware of that. And maybe they have the silver bullet card like Journey to Nowhere, or something. Maybe they just are doing something more powerful, and so these other strategies of just like Stompy being more aggressive and Elves actually having a good payoff are what works.
Yeah, so we see in these two decks, the ramp is enabling Stompy's aggression, and in Elves, the ramp is enabling its balliness. I don't know. It's Elf ball. The ramp is what allows that deck to just cascade out of control.
It's the ball rolling.
They're taking these powerful ramp spells that are some of the most powerful ramp spells in the game, and they're utilizing them in ways that enable their strategy outside of the obvious, I'm going to use ramp spells to get lands and then cast big things. So I think we're going to kind of be highlighting that like theme throughout the course of this show. So I want to make sure it's like ingrained into the listeners' heads that like this format utilizes ramp spells to enable things, not, as Sean said at the beginning, it's not I'm going to build a ramp deck, fill it with a bunch of Harrows and rampant growths. Okay, now what?
Yeah, the power level, the power level of the bomb spells, especially in green, is just like,
Fengrin Marauder, Colossal Dreadmaw.
I'm kind of excited for that new ape. It has trample, and when it dies, you draw a card. I think that's neat. I haven't seen
that yet. Is that a Core Set 2020 spoiler?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And like it looks fun. It doesn't look like something that's especially good, especially since like if it's exiled, it doesn't work. But like the class of big creatures just isn't that good in our format. They're just not protectable.
Yeah. So we've sort of talked about the land ramp, in Tron. We've talked about the creature ramp a little bit from Elves Stompy. Then we've got just another genre of ramp spells with enchantment-based ramp. So that's cards like Utopia Sprawl, Fertile Ground. So Fertile Ground, just to make sure I have that right, that's 1 and a green.
Yeah.
Or the land taps and generates an additional
any color of mana.
Any color of mana.
In addition.
So it's a 2-mana Utopia Sprawl.
Yes. The only difference is Utopia Sprawl can only go on forests.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's always relevant.
Yeah. And then there are versions. There's lots of versions that cost 3, and then you like gain 3 life or put a +1/+1 counter on your creature. But unless you're playing like a combo deck, like what's it called? Freed from the Real, where you're enchanting your land and just going infinite there. People usually don't play the 3-mana versions.
And I was gonna say, I think I misspoke earlier. Boggles doesn't play either of those cards, do they? They don't, because they play the 1 green that says draw a card, but it doesn't ramp you. It just basically turns your land into a rainbow land.
They play both.
They do. Okay, so they do have Utopia Sprawl.
Yeah, they have Utopia Sprawl, and like it's 1 mana, it ramps you, it makes 1 land hand. Yeah. So that's a really good use of that, of like, it's not very exciting to just have like an extra mana when you're playing that deck. You're like, I could make this something that buffs my toughness or have another creature.
Like if you've got, I don't know, if you've got like a double land opener, you can play your creature on turn 1 and then on turn 2 have access to the 3 mana. Granted, 1 of that mana is going to casting the Utopia Sprawl, but you cast it on your untapped land, and now you have 2 mana to cast an enchantments.
Yeah, you're mana neutral, and the next turn you're up a mana for the rest of the game.
It's basically free on that first turn, and then for the rest of the game you're up mana.
Yeah, and its ability to like get you to 3 mana to cast your really important like Ancestral Masks and stuff like that. Like the payoff is there, and that's why that one is very good.
And it also just like counts towards your ethereal armors and the like. So kind of playing double duty a little bit.
I do find it interesting. There's Utopia Sprawl, but there's a second 1 mana enchantment that it only makes a green mana. And when I've seen Arbor Elf strategies, where Arbor Elf, you can tap it to untap a land, that's been really cool. You're getting this extra mana multiple times a turn, and so it's much more effective than the additional lands version. It's still not good enough to see like tier 1 or 2 tournament play or anything like that, but I have seen it used pretty effectively in like land destruction archetypes.
Do you remember that red-green land destruction deck from Conley Woods that I was super jazzed about? And I was just like, if you want to play land destruction, stop playing mono black, play this. Like the Utopia Sprawl Arbor Elf engine was one of the things that just had me the most jazzed about that deck.
I really like that when you play the green versions, they're a little bit more expensive, but they come with like, okay, blow up their land and you get a land. Blow up their land and this other thing, and it's like, that's a cool way to ramp of like, okay, now the thinning actually matters because you just want to keep them at 0 land, like at least a little bit, because you have a payoff as well. So that's one of the, it's not so great because I do find that there are draws where you just draw too many of your ramp spells and not enough land destruction. They get out of control and you don't know what to do anymore. But there are also draws that are just unbeatable, and that's cool.
You just curve.
Well, I guess it's they don't have the lightning bolt, and you're able to cast your land destruction spells because you have an Arbor Elf.
Yeah, you're casting like turn 3 Munvali Acid Moss, turn 4 double land destruction spell, like double Molten Rain you or whatever, and stuff just gets out of control.
And there's also decks that just like, I guess that same deck, like usually decks like that try to play Ulamog's Crusher. And I just have a note written here, just like, Ulamog's Crusher is very big and very powerful, but you probably won't have a way to protect it, and it's probably gonna die. So like, don't make that your main strategy. It's just nothing that you can just ramp into and like win.
Yeah, I think I've been contrasting a lot between decks in other formats to sort of try to paint one of the key differences between other formats and this format when it comes to ramp spells. And thinking about the deck that we're talking about here in Pauper, this green-red sort of ramp, land destruction, kill him with Ulamog's Crusher deck. The contrast of that is the modern Ponza deck, whereas the payoff in that deck is Inferno Titan. Like, you build their lands and then you play Inferno Titan and you're already just getting just huge amounts of value just by putting that into play. And it's like, okay, it died. All right, well, I'm going to follow up. Here's Thragtusk now. I've just gained 5 life. You kill it, I'm going to get a 3/3. I've stabilized the board against an aggressive deck, whatever. In a deck like this, like you were talking about, sometimes you just draw your ramp, or sometimes you draw an awkward mix. They're able to get something onto the ground, like into the board. And then when your Ulamog Crusher comes down, it's either just not impactful enough, or they just have the resources to just kill it right away. And there's nothing you can really do about that. Because, like at the end of the day, Ulamog's Crusher doesn't do anything unless it attacks. Yeah. And it's not difficult to remove. Journey to Nowhere is one of the most popular removal spells in this format. That cleans up Ulamog's Crusher pretty efficiently.
And any kind of bounce spell, Edict in the right situation. Like, I feel like there's more spells that kill it than don't.
Yeah. I mean, and now we've got...
I guess there's a lot of burn spells, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, Skred's a popular removal spell. Against a land destruction deck, Skred's never going to kill Ulamog's Crusher. Same with a card like Defile. But decks with Defile often have access to cards like Doomblade.
Or just stack blocking and throwing a couple of bolts at it or something like that. Like, that hurts a lot, but I think that they're card neutral when you factor in, well...
how much resources you've put into getting Crusher in play.
Yeah, like if you've blown 3 of the cards in your hand, the other 3 were land, and you jam a Crusher and have almost nothing left, and they deal with it in 2 or 3 cards, you want to feel good about 3-for-1ing them or whatever, but that didn't just happen.
Yeah, they might even still be card neutral or ahead on cards after the exchange.
Yeah.
So, again, highlighting one of the issues with, traditional ramp strategies of putting all your eggs into one basket, so to speak. So next on the list, we've got artifact ramp spells. One in particular, which actively does see Pauper play and is utilized in a similar way to cards like Utopia Sprawl out of the Boggles deck, that's Springleaf Drum.
Yeah, it just gets your artifact count higher, and I guess this is as good of a spot as any to ask, do you think, like, I know cost reducers like familiars are ramp, but I'm not sure what I think about like Mirror Enforcer and Gurmag Angler, where
I think that, yeah, if you've designed your deck in a way to take advantage of them. So you're playing Thought Scour in your Gurmag Angler deck. That card is 3 Lotus Petals that draws a card to cast Delve spells. And Springleaf Drum taps a creature to add a mana, and then it just almost has a cost reduction for your affinity spells. I would count it. It's pulling double duty in the synergy that it provides, to your deck.
Okay. We do also have the Signets, and I didn't actually think of these. You brought them up, and I was like, okay, we'll put that on the list.
These are cards that don't get played in the format at all, but they're really powerful. You think about formats like Commander, having Signets and rocks, having your mana rocks is really crucial in Commander. And like Cube, blue Signets are some of the highest picks in Vintage Cube and Legacy. I guess not Legacy Cube anymore. I think they took them out, but like in Vintage Cube, having Signets is really, really important. So these are very clearly a powerful cycle of cards, but they just don't get played in our format.
Yeah,
I think a few times I've seen Dimir Signet played in control decks, blue-black control decks.
Or
But it's
Tron. I've seen a few in Tron decks, like here and there.
Simic Signet can show up in Tron, but otherwise they're just not played.
It might just be that the payoffs still aren't there, and definitely now I don't think they're going to see play since our color fixing just got a lot better.
Yeah.
I will bring up the border posts. They're just terrible. That's it.
There is a border post deck, right? And it plays like the Naya Hushblade stuff, and I think that like the border posts in that deck make sense because they're enabling the second ability on your creatures. That if you have the other multicolored permanent or whatever, they have haste or they have shroud or
I did forget about that.
So, I mean, I still think you're right. They're just not good. But
yeah, like you play those in that deck, and you're just like, oh, that's not that good.
I mean, again, it's a situation of it is a ramp spell, but it's not there because it's a ramp spell. It's there because it is enabling the synergy with the rest of your cards, and it is also incidentally helping you ramp.
And maybe color fix, I guess, but like I feel like if they had a non-creature multicolor permanent that had like pretty much any other text on it, I think it would be good or better.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the border post deck. I've never actually put a border post into play, so.
Oh, I did. It was underwhelming. You can tell that I carry a grudge from that day of like top deck of border post, and I was just like, never again. Yeah, and then we just have the cost reducers, and I think this is one of my most favorite effects in Magic is increasing and decreasing the costs of things. Like I love my Legacy Mud deck with my whole heart. Like that's not pauper, but I think cost reducers like familiars are super fun. I just don't have the patience and focus to play a familiars deck for more than like 2 games, because I'm just like, I will not. Like if you look at my YouTube and see the like any kind of combo deck, like there's the black green infinite combo with Ivy Lane Denizen on there, and I think I wasn't happy when I put that video out because I'm like, I'm just clearly miserable through this whole thing because I just have to click through all of these spells, and familiars has an added layer of like choosing which spells you're gonna cast next, and it's tough, but I think they're very cool.
It's really funny how this format, Magic Online, is like such a factor. Like,
Yeah.
Elves is not an issue to play in paper. But man, playing it online is just a headache.
Yeah, and that's our deck of the month, and I tweeted out that picture, and I've had a lot of games like that. I'm talking about the Elf Mirror. I was playing a match, and it was the match that I took a picture of. I was going as fast as I could, but my computer was having a hard time. I lost the game because I timed out, and he was 0 cards in his deck. I just had to get to his draw step, and it was probably 15 or 16 turns where we were just passing back and forth as fast as we could, and it just took so long because of Magic Online being slow that I lost. And if it was paper, I just would have decked him.
Yep. So back onto the topic of cost reducers, I think these are in effect some of the most powerful forms of ramp because they're sort of free. I mean, the initial casting cost of like putting the cost reducer into play, but from there they just generate.
It's multiple times a turn.
Often more than once a turn. In the familiars deck, you get one of your familiars into play, and now it's every single spell that you cast, you've generated an additional mana for to go towards casting it. And, you've cast 4 spells this turn since you put your familiar into play. That generated 4 mana. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. I think that's why I love it so much, is like it's a repeatable thing, so you can kind of build this engine, and then I find that I'm not a fan of like going through the motions on the engine that much. But I think delve spells and those mirror enforcers are pretty much the same thing. Like if especially with mirror enforcers and things with affinity, is you just have the number of artifacts. It's not that hard to put those artifacts into play, and then if you cast 3 mirror enforcers in a turn, every artifact on the board just generated another mana, in essence. And even if it's an overcosted spell, you just make up for it and put it into play, and I think that's really, really cool and powerful.
Yeah, and in particular, when it comes to Delve and Affinity, all your spells pull double duty. All of your artifacts, you pay the mana to get the card, but then that card is now generating mana for all your other affinity spells. Your cantrips, when you're playing a Gurmag Angler deck, you're paying 1 mana for, I don't know, let's ponder. We paid 1 mana to do all the powerful broken things that Ponder does, replace itself, and get you a Lotus Petal for your Gurmag Angler. You're just doubling up on what all your spells do. Basically, you're just getting free value, and then that's sort of why Delve is so broken. Affinity is so broken. It's not making you work. You're not having to use that cost restriction of I've got to actually put a spell in my deck that helps me get more mana. No, you just need to put spells in your deck that your deck wants to cast, and they're going to give you more mana for your spells. It's busted. Like, I wish they would just learn their lesson already and stop printing Delve spells. Like, how many times does Wizards have to ruin Modern before they realize that Delve shouldn't be a mechanic?
Are they still going?
They just printed one. Hogak. Have you heard about this?
Oh, is it the one out of the graveyard?
Yeah, the 5 hybrid black-green. You can't cast this spell. You can only cast it by convoking and
delving.
And it's just like, oh, this should be fine. No.
They put so many restrictions on it, and then
they give it delve and convoke.
Well, it's an easy way for them to be like, well, let's push this card. And so they'll just slap delve on it and make it kind of overpowered.
Yeah, and I need them to figure out that they need to stop doing that. I mean, Gurmag Angler, that card is so broken. And it's just a vanilla 5/5. But that card warped our format for a very long time.
Yeah. It's still one of the cards I think about when I'm brewing.
It's still one of the most powerful threats in our format.
Blue-black control is still very much a deck, and you can't just lose to a 5/5 outright.
Mm-hmm. Delve needs to stop.
I do think we're moving more towards back to where 4 is the toughness of our format, and I mean, it's a heck of a lot more manageable than 5.
Yeah, at least they gave us Magmatic Insight. That card's really good.
Are people playing it yet? I don't know,
but they should be.
I don't think so.
Playing with red cards, they should be. I mean, that card's basically Murderous Cut in our format.
I don't know.
I think that card's really, really good.
Should we just round this out with rituals?
Do we even have? Huh? Oh, we do have. Yeah, all the rituals are legal in this format. It's just yeah. I just forget that Manamorphose and Lotus Petal are legal cards to play in this format.
Yeah. Dark Ritual's an easy one to remember. I think that's actually sees enough play that you remember it. But people are always trying to jam Manamorphose into anything that triggers when a spell is cast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's very many ritual decks because the payoff just isn't there. Even land destruction spells, 2 for wanting yourself to do that and then having to catch back up with a Sign in Blood is the only time I think it ever sees play, and it's just not that good of a strategy, since those are just dead cards and they're just not repeatable. Like a lot of our ramp spells that we're seeing are repeatable. Pretty much all of them beside Nest Invader that we've listed are. And I think that's just because ramping is kind of good when it's like, okay, I'm just a mana ahead every turn of the game, so I've generated 8 more mana this game than you have, or something like that. And rituals really suffer from, like, even if you're playing like suicide aggro in black, you do run out of cards. Like, the speed isn't enough to like overtake. Like, Stompy will be a little bit slower because it can't pay 3 mana on turn 1, but it just had more cards and won out.
Alrighty, well, thank you all for listening. We're just going to close out the show here. It was a bit of a shorter one, but I still think it had a lot of good information in it. I think we had a lot of good conversation.
End time.
All right, thanks for listening. If you would like to support the show, you can do so via Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge. There you'll have access to Sean's graph, where he keeps everything updated on all of our power rankings month to month, so you can see the trends of the top decks in this format. As well as for members, you get access to the Common Coliseum, where you get to see Sean and I battle out a couple times a month, or I think we're just like once a month we post one of these videos. You'll get to see us battle it out. We're still reaching for our first stretch goal at $50, where we will be doing our 5-card blind tournament. And if you would like to find out all about that, go to the Patreon page and you'll be able to see all that information there. And of course, our patrons are also eligible for our Card of the Week drawing, where Sean and I will pick a name at random from among our patrons, and they will receive a playset of each Card of the Week from the prior month. So, lots of cool stuff over there at patreon.com. And of course, thank you to our sponsors, PureMTGO and InkGaming.com. You can find the show at PureMTGO along with all the other great Magic Online related content. And InkGaming.com, use that coupon code CCMTG10 at checkout to give yourself a sweet discount on all Inked Gaming accessories. And of course, the last and best way to support the show is to support the network that we are affiliated with. Go to Constructed Criticism on YouTube, like and subscribe and favorite and do all those YouTube things. And you'll not only be helping out our network and helping it grow and putting visibility onto Constructed Criticism and Common Knowledge, but you'll be getting access to a ton of great Magic content. So those are all the fun things you can do to support us. If you would like to get a hold of us, you can do so via email at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. You can find our show on Twitter at CKPodcastMTG, and you can find our wonderful Facebook group. It's small, but still growing. Just search for Common Knowledge. You can find me on Twitter at bclark_CK. And Sean, where can the beautiful listeners find your face?
They can find me on Twitter. I am at Lobbert8, that is Lobbert and the number 8. And then you can also find me on YouTube if you just search for Lobbert. Bye!